Let's bow in. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We're working our way through Mingyur Rinpoche's book, In Love with the World. And tonight, we're going to be covering chapters 18, that'll be me right now, and then 19 and 20 with Michael. So this chapter 18, is entitled Coming Through Darkness. That's good, thank you. And it starts out, he observes, until we wake up to the pure perceptions that are not filtered and distorted by culture and by our personal compulsions. Until that happens, we are sleepwalking. We're working out of habit, previous conceptions and ideas. And we're fully alive neither during the day nor the night. We're sort of living a dream. In the wisdom view, in order to wake up to reality in this life, first, we must allow the limited, conditioned self to let go and die. And that means the self that believes in all the preconceptions about the world and about what we are and who we are. We have all these beliefs that we're constantly involved in, and that has to go. So our feelings now are not in tune with reality. Our bodies are changing while our minds remain stuck in these concepts of who we are and what the world is and what the people around us are. I know my body is changing day by day, week by week, year by year, and yet mentally it feels the same, like this. And yet it's not. Mingyur Rinpoche says that we can start right now to cultivate more sensitivity to the subtle everyday transitions, the ways that require letting go and the lessons they offer. This is meditation. This is waking up, coming to reality, here, now, out of repetitive habits of mind. Within this bardo of this life, which is where we are, there are 3 stages to every new endeavor, and these parallel the bardo of dying, the bardo of dharmata, and the bardo of becoming. Something like this. This is what we experience. We experience a new relationship, perhaps, a new beginning. It starts with a moment of death of the old relationship or change. And we enter an unmapped domain of newness. And to be completely open and available to what it offers, in order to do that, we must let go of our cherished ideas of how things are supposed to work. We must allow these preconceptions to dissolve. Only through dying to these preconceptions, these repetitive, habitual ideas, will the past not dominate this moment. Then we can fully appreciate the sweetness of the fresh atmosphere that accompanies this stage of continual change and dying. When habitual behavior dominates our new aspirations, we cannot move forward, despite our best intentions. We carry into the new realm old idealizations and perfectionist fantasies, which make it difficult to truly succeed in any new venture. To really flourish in our new situation, which is always arising, we must leave our attachments behind and come completely awake, present. This parallels the bardo of dying. The bardo means interval, and this is one of the main bardos that we experience, the bardo of dying. With the end of our bodies, we have no choice but to leave this life, the life we have known, but we can still choose whether to let go of our attachments or hold on to them. And we're constantly being challenged to let go of our attachments and come present, awake, here, now. At the very end of our flesh and blood bodies, when we're going to die, we all have an amazing opportunity to recognize deathless awareness. Here it is, always here. This is a more exaggerated version of the dualistic mind becoming unglued and dissolving into dreams when we fall asleep. Happens every night. The point of making these parallels to the bardos within this life is to recognize the continual process of our own dying and rebirth. It's continual, never stops. This can really help us live a joyful life right now. It can also attune our perceptions to the big death that happens when our body gives out. And that will be coming. If we recognize luminous emptiness at the very end, which is death beyond death, as luminous emptiness, then we do not continue to the next stage or the next bardo, becoming completely one with death, and recognizing this union allows us to enter the deathless realm, which is the eternal present, always here, unconditioned by past and future, always just here waiting for us. It is beyond time, beyond beginnings and endings. In this stage, in this state, there is no next stage. We know complete ease with the situation we are in, the new relationship, the new job, whatever, not comparing it with the past or anticipating the future, not imposing expectations, not exaggerating possibilities, not being sneaky or suspicious, or making mountains out of molehills, or denying moments, unpleasant moments. Yet typically, as it happens with me, some of the clarity of intent in the first stage wears off. This is him speaking now, Mingyur. Before leaving the monastery, he had to expect to die to his old self overnight. This turned out to be naive. Stage 2 within the bardo of this life is marked by opportunity, which reflected his own outlook. The scaffolding of a new identity as a wandering yogi was in process. Unsettled. That characterizes this stage might be rough or peaceful, up or down, but the enthusiasm holds steady and optimism is not diminished by the many uncertainties. Everything is in motion, fluctuating. Nothing has quite gelled, and the atmosphere feels dreamlike. The first stage is like dying at the end of our lives or at the end of our days when we fall asleep. The situation impels us to let go. And then in the next stage, we enter a dreamscape where we experience the insubstantial quality of form. This parallels the bardo of Dharmata, the bardo that follows dying. So when we die, our body falls away, and then we enter the bardo of Dharmata, which is vivid and changing. This stage does not last forever either. Slowly, the transparency of dream forms becomes more opaque, and the fluid atmosphere becomes more stationary. I felt I was still in a dream state, somewhat floating, not walking with my feet on the ground. My mind knew that I had left Tergar, his monastery, that I was in Kushinagar, that I had started my wandering retreat. But my body still did not feel that this transitory state was my home. He wants to leave it all behind. In the third stage, translucent dream, forms begin to resemble our previous flesh and blood bodies, and the old tendencies strengthen. We become resigned, to repetition, even to activities that we neither like nor respect. We may normalize argumentation in our partnerships. Small white lies may evolve into deceit and dishonesty. Here we commonly feel really trapped. The weight of karmic propensities feels as impenetrable as a rock, and we lose access to the imaginative resolve that might liberate us. We feel so helpless that we convince ourselves that nothing can be done, that the exits are sealed and that we are doomed to spin in samsara, in confusion. The important point is that although it's harder to affect change here than in the previous two stages, it's still possible, definitely. Older people have an especially difficult time believing that decades of entrenched patterns are still changeable. If we do not believe that change is possible, of course you will not try. So it is important to realize neuroplasticity, the changeability of your mind, the ability of the brain to change and respond to new experiences at all stages of life. This information is incredibly helpful because if we don't believe that change is possible, of course we won't try. In the years leading up to this retreat, Mingyur Rinpoche had felt somewhat stuck. He had begun to feel stifled in his roles as Tulku, teacher, Rinpoche, and abbot. His good fortune was to know through training that change is always happening. Feeling trapped, stuck, immobile, these are self-fabricated stories. We're constantly in motion, constantly in change. Everything around us is changing. We have the innate capacity to liberate ourselves from these numbing descriptions. We really do change every second, even though we may think we don't. 50 to 70 billion cells in our body die every day, allowing for billions of new cells to take fleeting existence. Life occurs on an ocean of death, and that's what we are experiencing. Without death, there is no life. If we wake up to this reality, we can actively direct what comes next and not just passively accept false conclusions of what feels inevitable. This is similar to the bardo of becoming. If we wake up in this stage, we can direct our next day or rebirth in our next life. This is what's happening to me as I sat on the floor of the Varanasi station. This is what was happening to me. He got caught up in a rainstorm, ran out into the public toilets, and meditated there. His intention was to stay present and open to awareness and to rest in that awareness. He acknowledged the sound of heavy rain, the sound of wind, the sensation of wetness, of bad smells, and of standing. He was not reaching out toward any sensation, not withdrawing, not getting lost. Now he could recognize that he did not like the smell, but that it was okay. He did not have to like it, just had to be with it. Without creating a big story around it, don't push it away, for this just escalates mental agitation and blocks the capacity for awareness. When the rain stopped, he vowed to himself that he would not take refuge from it in the toilets again. The next day, the temperature soared. Heat rose from the ground, creating what looked like a desert mirage. At noontime, he returned to the restaurant with a delicious dal and then took refuge in his room with its ceiling fan. By 3 o'clock, he was back in the park and the rain started heavy. He was getting soaked. Nothing to run away from, I told myself. Nothing to avoid, nothing to love or hate, nothing to celebrate or regret. Wet, dry, happy, sad, good smells, bad smells. If I stay with the awareness, I will be fine. After that, I did not go outside when it rained, and I did not return to the guest house to avoid the heat. I would continue to pick and choose between a banana and a roasted ear of corn. This food stall or that one, but I would diminish choices, especially those relating to avoidance. 3 nights later, he again dreamed he was walking between Kathmandu and Newbury with his mother. He dreamt that they were caught in a fierce rainstorm and in danger of drowning. Instead of waking himself up to escape the terror, he recognized that it was a dream, grabbed his mother, and together they walked on top of the water to get across the river and continue their journey through a green field free from danger. Now he could free himself from fear in a dream state. Then he could free himself on the street with his eyes open. Why not? Ultimately, the waking form is no firmer than the dream form. No more lasting, no more real. There is only one big obstacle. It's much easier to recognize emptiness in a dream when we are sleeping with our eyes closed than to recognize the emptiness of all phenomena when we have our eyes open. The point is not to convince ourselves that we really can walk on water, but to understand that the solidity we normally have subscribed to our bodies is not real, and that bringing a more reliable perspective to who and what we are has lasting benefits. Acceptance of our own essential emptiness and the emptiness of all phenomena diminishes our impulses to hold tight to things that cannot really be held. Every day I increased the length of my meditation sessions in the park. How quickly I took comfort in a routine, returning to my spot in the park and returning to my room. Being outside and alone was getting easier, but I still noticed that it provoked feelings of self-consciousness that decreased on returning to my spot in my room. He began exploring different restaurants within the area, near the guest house, always ordering rice and dal. He also experienced strong memories of eating with his grandmother, the pleasure of the food. The summer heat brought outdoor movement to a near halt. Until the temperature has cooled down in the evening, the villagers mostly slumbered indoors, venturing out as little as possible. After 5 or 6 days of just going to and from the Parinirvana Park, he began to explore the town, or rather exploring his mind as he strolled through empty lanes or stopped to sit and meditate. Occasionally he passed the Tibetan temple but never went in, though he did enter and enjoy the Thai temple. Then he began exploring areas further away, including a nearby site where Shakyamuni Buddha was served his last meal by Kunda, the blacksmith, which turned out to be poison and killed the Buddha. One evening at dusk, he walked to the village intending to meditate on the street as late as possible. The minute Mingyur sat down, a swarm of mosquitoes descended around his head, so he covered himself with his robes and ended up back in the guest house before dark. Later, when he was trying to make excuses for running away from the mosquitoes, he came up with fear of dengue fever. That's a fever, dengue, D-E-N-G-U-E. Was it true or just an excuse? And that ends chapter 18. Michael.
Okay, so chapter 19 is different than much of what we've read, in that whereas for a lot of this text, what he's provided us with is instruction regarding how to work with ourselves, work with awareness in life. In this chapter, he actually talks more directly about meditation practice itself. So begins with the chapter is entitled "A Chance Encounter," and it begins with his encountering an Asian man who essentially won the $1 billion lottery by practicing meditation and having the opportunity to speak with Mingyur Rinpoche about his practice. We should be so fortunate. But that's what happened, and it's the dialogue over several days between Mingyur Rinpoche and this man who was a beginning meditator that really informs this chapter. And there's a lot that can be drawn out of this. It's actually a tremendously profound chapter in many, many ways. I've read it now several times over and come up with so many different things that I'd like to talk about that it could become somewhat overwhelming. One thing that I was thinking about, I don't know how many people here have had an opportunity at some point to do the Shambhala training levels that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche developed. But basically, if you live near a center that offers them, I'd recommend. They are weekend-long programs that explore different aspects of meditation practice as well as the Shambhala teachings. But the point that I wanted to make specifically is within each level, there are five levels of Shambhala training, there are somewhat different aspects of meditation practice that are presented. Different ways of approaching the practice, although essentially the practice is the same throughout. But for instance, just as you might recall from reading The Profound Treasury, the first volume, The Path of Individual Liberation, where there are several chapters on meditation practice, he says at one point in one of those chapters that when we practice meditation, 25% of our awareness is on our breath, 75% is on the environment. And again, the idea isn't to be rigid in applying these percentages, but to realize that the purpose of shamatha meditation in the Buddhist sense is not just to become totally absorbed in the object of meditation, but to open up to awareness. And at a certain point in the Shambhala training, even that there are different aspects of meditation that are emphasized around level 3, toward the end, what you'd be asked to do is during the weekend to practice in the way that is presented at that level, but that having completed the weekend, then in a sense you become your own meditation instructor, that you know best what works for you, and you should be honest about what works for you and look honestly at your practice and your life, but that you know best what works best for you in terms of meditation practice. At the same time, it's very helpful to talk to other people about meditation practice because there are ways in which meditation practice can go awry. Usually this happens when meditation turns into too much of a project or a goal, which is what we're going to see in this chapter. It's exactly what Suzuki Roshi, the Zen Buddhist teacher, said when he said whenever there's a problem in meditation practice, it's usually because there's a gaining idea. So that's what happens here. Mingyur Rinpoche meets with this individual, this tall Asian man, who he says had been taught anapanasati or mindfulness of breathing by Thai, in the Thai tradition, but that he was struggling because he couldn't stop thoughts. And he said that his mind chased after thoughts. And he asked if he could speak to Mingyur Rinpoche, since he recognized that he seemed to be an experienced meditator, which is, again, this guy won the lottery. And Mingyur Rinpoche spoke with him about meditation practice. And he said, there's no need to get rid of thoughts. To quote him directly, do not make thoughts your enemies. The problem is not thoughts, it's following them. When you feel yourself moving to an image, an idea, a past event, a plan for tomorrow, that is what you have to watch out for, not the thoughts themselves. And then he said, when you get lost in thought or hooked by a story, then bring the mind back to the breath as a way of coming back to yourself. So he was seeing that in this man's approach to meditation, he had some idea of what meditation should be, some goal that he felt he should be achieving, and that this, in fact, rather than aiding his practice, had become an obstacle to his practice. So he said, there's no need to get rid of thoughts. Don't make thoughts your enemy. He said, if you forget awareness, then you're no longer meditating. But that we work with the breath as an anchor, sometimes I've said a stepping stone, but same idea, that helps you stay connected with awareness. Because each breath is now. So awareness of the breath automatically brings us back to this present moment. As long as you don't forget awareness, you can let thoughts come in and go out like a swinging door. And then the man said, well, when I try to meditate, when I try to calm my mind, the thoughts multiply. And Mingyur Rinpoche lets him know this is a common experience. And speaking for myself, it was certainly one of my first experiences in engaging in meditation practice, literal amazement at how many thoughts there were. If there was any one thing that was clear to me, especially my first attempts working with meditation practices, no wonder I'm confused. It was like being in a swirling snowstorm with just, almost whiteout conditions in terms of thoughts. So Mingyur Rinpoche said, anyway, this is a common experience, and this is exactly what I was told, and then when I functioned as a meditation instructor, what I've been able to tell other people as well, having directly had this experience myself, that there really aren't more thoughts, but what's happening is we're becoming more aware of actually what's happening in our minds. You're more aware, as Mingyur Rinpoche says, of what was always there, and the thoughts only seem to multiply. But he goes on to say some really interesting things here. He says that, Mingyur Rinpoche says that learning to meditate can express a yearning for freedom, a genuine aspiration to transcend the grasping ego. But, he says, we're also frightened by this, so our conventional mind has tricky ways of fending off the quest. So the man then looked perplexed. So Mingyur Rinpoche went on to say, the first thing that happens when we begin to meditate is that we learn how crazy our minds are. Many take that as a sign that we're not cut out for meditation, but actually it's the opposite. It's the first sign that we're becoming familiar with our own mind, and it's a great insight. So again, becoming familiar, Gom, as we've said before, Gom is one of the Tibetan words for meditation, becoming familiar. And this is one of the first things that we become familiar with, is the nature of both clarity and confusion in our minds. And the fact that there's enough clarity to see how many thoughts there are is actually a very positive sign. Or as Mingyur Rinpoche says, it's a great insight. So he goes on to give this man a little bit more advice. He says, one piece of advice, don't conclude that your mind is significantly different from anyone else's. Certainly isn't different from mine, at least. We all have this monkey mind. Once we put the monkey mind under the magnifying glass, the mind commonly appears crazier than ever. But it's not. You're just allowing yourself to become acquainted with how crazy it's always been. So with this, Mingyur Rinpoche then shares with us in the text. Again, this isn't so much direct conversation with this man, although some of the direct instruction was. But he just says the mind makes thoughts just like the lungs make air. The dynamic element of air, sometimes called wind, within the body keeps thoughts in motion. We can no more stop thoughts than we can stop the wind. This is very similar to one of the songs of Milarepa, where he basically says 1,000 men with spears can't stop the profusion of thoughts, and we can't lock thoughts in an iron box and stop them. That we need to recognize the awareness and the emptiness of mind, but that it's, again, the goal is not to simply eliminate thoughts. And the idea of the wind, just the wind in the body, relates to the notion of the movement of prana in the subtle body, which again is in the Vajrayana level, much more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between mind and body than we normally have. But that just the notion of movement of mind relates to winds in the body. Which again, not necessarily literal air, but the sense of movement of mind in the body, and in the subtle body. In any case, Mingyur Rinpoche noted that the man felt defeated, that he was at war with his thoughts, fighting them and feeling that he failed. But from Mingyur Rinpoche's point of view about this man's experience and about this man's approach to meditation, It's amazing that he chose to spend his vacation this way. He found out that the man was a businessman and been quite busy, had a important position, and had chosen to use vacation time to come to Kushinagar to practice meditation. And he felt that was amazing that he chose to spend his vacation that way. And he says he's learning exactly the way everyone does, with misconceptions and frustrations and trying again and again. So Mingyur Rinpoche, again, in his conversation with this man, explained that the frustrations demonstrated a positive sign, that the thoughts had been recognized as a source of distress and satisfaction, that this was, again, a positive sign, that the thoughts had been recognized as a source of distress and dissatisfaction. And then Mingyur Rinpoche, and here it's not clear. Sometimes it seems like it's a dialogue with the man. Sometimes he uses the italicized pieces as a dialogue with himself. And sometimes it seems to be a dialogue with us. It really doesn't matter. But the point is this: just think of how common it is to never stop blaming circumstances and never even consider looking at one's mind to resolve problems. So this is an important point. This is a key realization in Buddhist practice, starting with the Hinayana, but it really carries all the way through. That essentially, when we're confused and when we're lost in samsara, what we're looking at is for some kind of external circumstance, external causes and conditions to make us happy, to bring us a sense of peace, to give us some kind of security. And from a Buddhist point of view, that's an exercise in futility. That is one of the reasons why, it's not the only reason, but it's one reason why Mingyur Rinpoche again and again asks us to consider impermanence, because causes and conditions change all the time. So looking for external causes and conditions, whether it's a lover, money, a job, whatever it is, ultimately will not bring us happiness in the way that looking inward and working with our minds will. Even the talking heads say in the song, try to recognize what's in your mind. That what we're asked to do in meditation is to look inward, not centralizing inward, not grasping inward, but to be aware of the thoughts, feelings, intentions that run through our mind. And that this rather than looking to external conditions, is ultimately what brings liberation. That problems arise in the mind and its misperceptions and misconceptions, beginning with the belief that real happiness exists in external things. This is not to say that we don't work with causes and conditions in our life. It's, again, that's another one of, as he says, one of conventional mind's little tricky ways of getting us to go astray, is to jump from one extreme to another. So we're not taking this as an extreme, but we realize that at least in our meditation practice, we can look inward and look at, again, our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions, and in that way become liberated. So Mingyur Rinpoche goes on to say that everything we want is already within us. We need to relax and let our innate wisdom come forth. So this is a very fruitional statement, but sometimes we experience this, particularly in meditation practice, but sometimes in daily life. We have moments where we have this sense of a very simple contentment with just simply being now, without any intention to make things different or being able to let go of any sense of looking to make things different. And ultimately, this is what we work with, this is what we find when we do meditation practice. So the man left to meditate, as did Mingyur Rinpoche, and 2 days later, he says he saw the man again. The man came up to him and said that he'd found his advice helpful, as it was a relief to learn that meditation did not require getting rid of thoughts. In other words, he was beginning to see that the fact that he was still having thoughts did not mean that he had failed. He said that his mind still wandered, but he was able to sit with less agitation. But he was still troubled by thoughts, particularly one in particular. So, interestingly, Mingyur Rinpoche did not highlight this one thought as much in the text as I might, but this was the one thought that he had the most trouble with. He had difficulty accepting that wisdom was inherent and that enlightened qualities need to be revealed, not created. But in fact, that's a tremendously profound statement, and something that we can come to understand through our practice of shamatha vipassana. So again, he had difficulty accepting that wisdom was inherent and that enlightened qualities need to be revealed, not created. So inherent, or another word might be innate. Wisdom is innate, wisdom is inherent. And being me, I'm learning in my older age that I like actually looking up definitions of words, because I think sometimes I'm not as precise or don't have the definition as precise as I should. So inherent, existing in something as a permanent, essential, or characteristic attribute. So wisdom exists in us as a permanent, essential, or characteristic attribute. The one thing that we might say is permanent. We'll come to that. So I'm not going to talk about that in terms of wisdom, because that leads to more problems with definition, although I think he does define it as he goes along. But I'm going to talk about it as awareness. So let's say that awareness is inherent, and that doesn't need to be, that it just needs to be revealed, not created. That awareness isn't something that we create. It's not something that we turn off and on like a flashlight. That thinking that it's so is a misperception or a misconception. We get confused because our ability to recognize it fluctuates. This is exactly what in one teaching, online teaching that I participated with Mingyur Rinpoche, he was very clear about, that we think our awareness comes and goes, but really what comes and goes is our recognition. Our recognition fluctuates with causes and conditions. So there are certain causes and conditions that we work with because they're more conducive to allowing us to recognize our fundamental awareness, this inherent innate wisdom that's within us, such as choosing to meditate in a quiet environment where we're not likely to be disturbed and there aren't too many reminders to hook us back into our ordinary preoccupations. That when we practice, we at least make some effort to let go of ordinary preoccupations. This is what's meant in the chant when it says renunciation is the foot of meditation. That we do things like take a good posture and work with the breath or some kind of technique to just simply recognize awareness. But if we look at what's actually happening in meditation, and it's because of this that sometimes we might get confused and think that awareness is something that we create, but it's not. If we look, we come to realize over time that we don't create awareness. We just allow ourselves to experience it or to recognize it. We just allow ourselves to experience what's already there, if only dimly at times. Perhaps very dimly. It's like the line in the Bible, now I see through a glass darkly. So we at least know that something's there, even if we don't see it, with great clarity. But awareness itself is uncreated. It's not a mental creation. Traditionally, it's said that awareness or Buddha nature is unborn, which means that it's not dependent on causes and conditions. Again, the recognition of it may connect to causes and conditions, but the awareness itself does not depend on causes and conditions. And for that reason, it's also described as unceasing, unborn and unceasing. It's also described as non-dwelling, but we'll come to that later. Some Mahayana teachings actually describe it as permanent, yet empty, ungraspable. In the Vajrayana, it's described as indestructible awareness, the Vajra mind, that's never affected in any way by any experience. And this recognition of mind's essential nature, of mind's essential wisdom nature, awareness, rigpa, whatever we want to call it, that seeing, that knowing, seeing and knowing that's vipassana. That's the vipassana experience. But anyway, to go back to the text, I just wanted to go on with that sentence, that he had difficulty accepting that wisdom was inherent and that enlightened qualities need to be revealed, not created. I need to remind myself about that, because it's very easy, again, to fall into thinking that we need to create something, strive towards something, make something happen. And this is what got this man lost in struggle. So anyway, back to the text. Mingyur Rinpoche goes on to describe how this man's life in the business world depended on bottom lines, goals, striving for gains. And the man said something about that he feared that becoming more accepting, just being able to just simply be in the present moment, becoming more accepting would make him passive. And Mingyur Rinpoche with this, very interesting contemplation for us about acceptance and passivity. Because this acceptance and passivity have nothing to do with each other, that the point of practice is not to turn us into passive beings. And he gives a definition of acceptance, true acceptance, that I think as we go through this definition that he gives, it does give us some idea about what he means about wisdom as well. And also how meditation helps reveal, again, not create, but to reveal these qualities. True acceptance requires an open mind. In other words, a mind that's not locked into, fixated on concepts and preconceptions. And I think people here have enough experience in meditation to realize that meditation practice allows us to experience open mind. It allows us to let go. So that's true acceptance. True acceptance is willing to investigate whatever arises. So again, this investigating is another way of talking about the seeing, knowing quality, particularly of Vipassana. It's what Trungpa Rinpoche used to use the words inquisitive, being inquisitive and looking further, but same idea. And it's this capacity of mind to do this that is, again, our inherent wisdom, our innate true nature. It can never be programmed. It means meeting the world with freedom. So freedom, again, and this is the non-dwelling aspect of awareness, that awareness is flexible, open. Fluid might be a word you could use, but that there's freedom in being awake. There's freedom in being present. Maintaining fresh mind, just as it says in the chant, the essence of awareness is the body of meditation. Whatever arises is fresh. Here, now, clear, vivid, that shows up for all situations. And this, again, the wisdom aspect, just being available to the world, and being available to ourselves. It requires trusting in uncertainty. Acceptance allows for genuine discernment to arise from wisdom. So again, the discernment is talking about the prajna aspect that develops out of practice, that we're able to know what things are. We're able to know ultimately what to accept and what to reject, but that comes later in terms of these chapters, I think. Allows for genuine discernment, clarity to arise from wisdom, rather than basing our decisions, having our decisions limited by rote patterns. So again, all of that is what he defines as true acceptance. An open mind, willing to investigate, meeting the world with freedom, maintaining fresh mind, trusting in uncertainty, and genuine discernment. So again, another way to say it is true acceptance means seeing things as they are. It's true openness, it's investigation, freedom, flexibility, shinjan, all of that. And that all are the qualities, again, that aren't created, but that are revealed through meditation practice. He said the man had been trying to figure out how to make meditation more active, productive, more of a work asset related to his job. And, So Mingyur Rinpoche at this point talked about a dialogue between a friend of his and a professor in Taiwan, I believe. And the question that it sounds like the professor was a professor of economics, and later he describes the friend as a monk. It also sounds like there were some language issues in this. But basically, the question was asked, is Buddhism productive or creative? And Mingyur Rinpoche's friend at first said it was productive. And the professor disputed that, saying the concern with productivity can get you stuck if you get attached to fixed goals. You get you stuck if you get attached to fixed goals. That's what we need to let go of in terms of meditation practice. Because when you get stuck like that, you can't adapt or innovate. And again, he's even talking about this in the business world. Eventually you lose as conditions change. And there are all kinds of this. Actually, what's really interesting about, let me finish this section. So he says the friend then changed his mind and said Buddhism was actually about creativity. And he said that he arrived at this conclusion by investigating uncertainty. You can never be certain of anything. And this again relates back to Mingyur Rinpoche asking us again and again to contemplate impermanence. that things are impermanent, in which he describes as, yes, it's an inconvenient fact, but it's a fact nonetheless. We could die at any moment. And the monk says to the professor, again, in regard to this, to remain open and responsive requires flexibility, and that flexibility is creative, in other words, not passive. And it goes on to say, we're always taking a chance, whether we know it or not, precisely because there is no certainty. Preoccupation with certainty indicates a fixed idea of success. Creativity means staying open to change and risking failure. So the interesting thing about this entire contemplation is it kind of flips around what we normally think of as passive and in regard to acceptance. That in fact, staying stuck with a fixed goal, regardless of changing circumstances all around us, that's the ultimate passivity, and it's very different from the acceptance that we develop in meditation practice. We want to cultivate the ability to be fresh, clear, and flexible. So he goes back again to his conversation with this Asian man, this guy who had the incredible good fortune of having Mingyur Rinpoche as a meditation instructor over several days, and says to him, do not worry about succeeding and failing. Do not worry about succeeding and failing. Or, as we sometimes will say, don't get caught up in hope and fear. Same idea, hope for success, fear of failure. Do not let go of hope and fear. He says, you do not know the size or measurement of your mind, so you cannot measure its so-called progress. Taking the focus off the goal does not mean giving up. It means staying receptive to the present. It means allowing a fresh response to what's happening and becoming more comfortable with innovation, rather than repeating stale impersonations of your old self. Rather than repeating stale impersonations of your old self. And what he's beginning to talk about here is how we get stuck in identity, got stuck with ego, stuck with some fixed ideas of who we are. He says, of course your mind will stray. You'll be distracted by sight, sounds. Your mental composure will fall apart and come together again. That's how it works. But if you can accept whatever happens, good, bad, or indifferent, that's the best practice. And then he goes on to talk about, again, this relates back to repeating stale impersonations of our old self, our tendency to get caught up in, lost in ego and ego fixation. He says we need to develop some confidence to know that dropping our masks is renewal, rather than suicidal madness. And he begins this by talking a little bit about a video that he watched of children making masks and really having fun making masks and wearing the masks and so on. But this leads to some contemplation because, as he says, although this starts as play, over the course of development, this is how we solidify into the development of lifelong patterns. That we, as he says, we build a mask and then we grow into that mask. We fully inhabit that mask. It becomes the real you, or at least that's what we think, but not quite. Not quite the real you. On some level, we know that below the thinking mind, there is more to our being than the masks that hide our true selves. As he says, in the middle of the night, we doubt our authenticity, but don't often know what to do and end up doing nothing. Again, we're more fortunate than that. We have teachings and a practice that actually helps us to work with this. As he says, the process of training the mind, which is essentially what we're doing in meditation practice, peels off the masks. So this goes back to, in that sentence, that we don't need to create wisdom. We don't need to create what's innately with us. We need to reveal. And what's covering up, what's distorting it is our attachment to ego and our attachment to fixed ideas and goals. As he says, we're not robots programmed to imitate ourselves, but we don't always know how to use our creative reserves. Being defensive, uptight, lazy, irritable, or self-conscious are not in our DNA. These things are what's not inherent in us, not innate in us, but that we acquire out of habit and social pressures and confusion and ignorance. We don't have to continue their destructive influence. We don't have to continue with the masks, with the self-defeating behavior patterns, negative emotional reactions, and so on, because they're not inherent. And we develop this confidence, again, through meditation practice, contemplation, and study, by seeing again and again, and allowing ourselves to again and again recognize our true nature. He says, during this, the Asian man sat quietly nodding, looking attentive and sad, as if realizing he would soon be saying farewell to behaviors he had once cherished. And then they both left to meditate. So again, the man, 2 days later, the man again approaches Mingyur Rinpoche. So again, this is over several days that he's having these conversations and these contemplations and these meditations. And he asked questions about Mingyur Rinpoche's training and experiences in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and expressed interest in Tibetan Buddhism altogether. But it also seemed, Mingyur Rinpoche said, it seemed the man's problem was he was still trying to control thoughts and was stuck with the idea that meditation was about attaining joy and clarity through non-thinking. And again, Mingyur Rinpoche again makes a really important point that we need to come back to remind ourselves, or at least I need to remind myself over and over again. The essence of meditation is awareness. I'll say it again. The essence of meditation is awareness. Joy, clarity, inner peace, these are the byproducts, but not the essence of meditation itself. And the more we strive for them, the more mind constricts around ideas of what should happen. These ideas about what should happen diminish the capacity to recognize our own awareness. And again, we see this. We could see this happening from time to time in our practice, that we realize we're caught up in some kind of goal, some kind of striving, some kind of analyzing and judging our experience and wanting it to be different, wishing for another now. And when we see that, we can see that it's happening and just relax, let go. It's not so much that we try to stop it as much as we stop engaging with it and just see it. And that's the point, that's the next point that Mingyur Rinpoche makes in this text. He says he introduces him to thought meditation, or using thoughts as the object of meditation. The closest thing I think that we have to this in how Trungpa Rinpoche taught meditation is the chapter on touch and go, again in the Profound Treasury, because essentially that's, in a way, you could say that's what this is, except that there's an emphasis on thought meditation. Mingyur Rinpoche actually presents this practice of thought meditation, which, by the way, is very much a part of the Mahamudra tradition, in a different text that he wrote, a book called Turning Confusion into Clarity. And I will come back to our book, In Love with the World, but I actually want to read a few things from Turning Confusion into Clarity. If I misword that, which I sometimes do, the point is not to turn clarity into confusion. It's confusion into clarity. The first thing he talks about in terms of understanding what this thought meditation is that he says that normally our monkey mind is in the driver's seat. Our thoughts lead. One thought leads to another, and we cannot stop them. And often they drive us crazy. When we cultivate awareness, we no longer fall into the river. Awareness itself allows us to stand at the river's edge without getting sucked into the currents. We're liberated from the tyranny of the monkey mind. Thoughts are still there. They may be quiet or turbulent, focused or wild and scattered, but we've stopped identifying with them. We have become the awareness, not the thoughts. With the recognition of awareness, we can stand back and watch thoughts and know that we are watching them. We no longer need to get rid of them because they are no longer pushing us around. Identifying with our natural awareness and not the thoughts dissolves their destructive power. And before I actually want to do this, have us all do this practice together, but before I do, I want to read one more piece, which essentially says the same thing, and this is from a different teacher, Garchen Rinpoche. Meditate in shorter but more frequent sessions to ensure the good quality of your meditation. It's best just to observe the nature of mind, the ordinary bare mind, and preserve it. When thoughts appear, neither reject nor accept them. Do not try to stop thoughts. Allow them to arise, but recognize their arising and do not pursue them. The goal is not to have no thoughts, but for thoughts to arise, yet be rendered powerless. You must habituate this. Then later, when negative thoughts and emotions arise, you will not fall under their power. The energy of these thoughts may arise, but will not affect you in one way or another. Sometimes in meditation, well, we'll come back to that later. But again, it's the whole idea of being able to see thoughts without engaging with them, without being caught up in them. As Mingyur Rinpoche says, thoughts arise, come and go, but we don't go along for a ride. And that's the practice that he's describing. And so I actually like to do this for a moment now with all of us. As he says, as Mingyur Rinpoche begins by saying to place your mind on the thoughts, whatever comes, just watch. In the same way that you could use your breath as support for meditation, now use thoughts. In turning confusion into clarity, he's actually a much more formalized way of doing this. So I'll read through that. So just begin by taking a good posture, a relaxed posture with your back straight. Eyes can be open or closed. Take a moment or two then, just to rest in open awareness. If it helps to settle the mind and to let go of everything we've just talked about and just simply be present, follow your breath. Just follow the out-breath as we usually do, and let thoughts just dissolve with the out-breath. Or you could even follow both the in and out-breath and just be aware that you're breathing. We'll just do this for a moment or two. Then, allow thoughts to arise. Bring your awareness to the thinking itself. Observe your thoughts with awareness. Don't try to change the thoughts. Don't try to make them disappear. Just turn toward your thoughts with awareness. Don't try to analyze, interpret, or judge your thoughts. Simply observe them. Simply observe them. If thoughts disappear naturally, rest in open awareness. When thoughts return, simply see them as a support for your awareness. If you get carried away by thoughts, then gently bring the mind back to the process of just staying aware of thoughts. And we conclude by just a moment of resting in open awareness. So this is what he asked this man to do, to try practicing in this way for at least a few minutes. So try to practice this way, just staying aware of your thoughts without chasing after them. Thoughts come and go, no problem. Register sound, sensation, no problem. Take note of discomfort in your body, agitation, restlessness, fine. Be with the clarity of mere knowing, knowing without concepts, knowing without the grasping impulses of the ego self, knowing without fixation. This connects you with your own inner wisdom. So he had him try this, and he came back an hour later. So I could ask you what your experience is, but at least they teach lawyers not to ask questions they don't know the answer to, but that's not true for teachers, I guess. But if people come for a discussion group tomorrow night, it would be interesting to talk about this practice. But anyway, the man came back. He said, I try to watch thoughts. When I try to watch thoughts, I can't find them. My mind goes blank. And Mingyur Rinpoche says, this is the secret of thought meditation. What you're calling blank is actually open awareness. Here, there is no object of awareness, as with the breath or with the thought. The mind isn't working with an object of meditation to come back to. Awareness is aware of itself. And that is a key aspect of Mahamudra meditation, at least. Awareness is aware of itself. It recognizes the spacious, knowing qualities of mind that are always present. When one looks for a thought and suddenly can't find one, in that moment there is no object, just awareness. So it's a perfect moment to recognize awareness without getting hooked by an object. But, he says, you're not used to recognizing that, so you think of it as a blank or a nothing. Then Mingyur Rinpoche points out that after the experience of the blank, the man had recognized he couldn't find his thoughts. Could not find his thoughts. This experience is not true open awareness, but it's a little more spacious than cascading thoughts. This is awareness without too much thought. If the experience of blank is dismissed as irrelevant or unimportant, that won't be helpful. The blank exists within awareness, but even when we do not recognize it, it means less thinking, less mental spinning. If you can recognize that the blank has less thinking, then you're connecting to the quality of empty mind. And in that moment, there is clarity and luminosity. What is this luminous mind? It is the mind that experiences thoughts with awareness. So it's just an interesting way. He says something similar in turning confusion into clarity. For many people, trying to stay aware of thoughts tends to make thoughts disappear. This is fine, let them go. Don't put energy into holding on to them. In fact, often this inability to hold thoughts leads to open awareness, so just let that happen. But the effect of this meditation over time is that even when thoughts remain, they do not carry you away. Awareness channels the power of monkey mind in a different direction. Not getting sucked into the current, this is meditation. You're following your own orders to practice awareness. In this way, you use thoughts to liberate yourself from thoughts. And he goes on to say again, this is from the other text, turning confusion into clarity. Thoughts do not stop, but you can stop rushing after them. The recognition of awareness now defines your mind, which reduces ego fixation and clinging. Anything that helps dissolve a solid sense of self, of an independent I, works to your benefit. The mind that recognizes awareness is no longer all about me. So, again, as he says in the text we did read, it's the mind that experiences thoughts with awareness. In other words, when we recognize awareness, then this experience of blank or gap, which is how we've often talked to it, becomes spaciousness. It opens the spacious quality of mind. And Mingyur Rinpoche tells the man, if you can watch thoughts, then it's like watching television. You're not in the television, you're watching it. Like standing on the edge of a river without falling in. You watch the inner TV, but remain on the outside. And again, this is like Trungpa Rinpoche saying you see the thought come and go, but you don't get on for the ride. Mingyur Rinpoche says that what we have is a TV screen. The TV we have is a big screen with lots of free channels, but the problem is that the programs are old and there's lots of reruns. With them, he said that they, again, went their separate ways to meditate until the park closes. He met the man again at the gate, and the man thanked him, felt that he really felt a change in his practice, and felt that this trip, this vacation, had been more valuable than anything he anticipated. And Mingyur Rinpoche says that he was glad he could give to this man, as it's his practice to give what was asked of him whenever possible without picking or choosing. But he was also, again, somewhat dismayed about recognizing that he'd fallen back into the teacher's role, that he was feeling the comfort, as he says, of inhabiting a familiar voice. And he commented overall that he says, I had wandered between lives for 2 weeks and reemerged briefly again as Mingyur Rinpoche, the correct monk, the Buddhist Lama. And he ends this chapter by saying, I vow to be more watchful and hope that wearing yogi clothes would help. So the next chapter is very short, but it again contains a couple of interesting points. He had gotten some sadhu clothes. So the Tibetan robes are a red color, crimson, I guess, is the color. Whereas the sadhu robes are a different color, saffron color, kind of orange yellow. And he says, as he was figuring out how to actually wear these clothes, because they fit differently, they go on differently than Tibetan monk robes. I would have no idea how to do either, by the way. But he says that not wearing Buddhist robes was still disturbing to him, although he was looking forward to actually changing out of the robes as part of, again, his desire to give up any attachment to his old identity. He says he received his first robes from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was a great Nyingma master and one of Trungpa Rinpoche's teachers. He received his first robes from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche when he was 4 or 5 years old and had worn them ever since. And he talks about the support that monastic robes give. And again, this is similar to the support that we find when we engage with a good posture, a quiet environment, and good intention and meditation practice. Monastic robes, he says, help shelter the mind from straying into wrong views or incorrect behavior. They offer a constant reminder to stay here, to stay aware. They reinforce the discipline of the Vinaya vows, the rules for monks and nuns. And he says he wasn't too concerned with behavior, but what he was concerned about was the discipline of maintaining the recognition of awareness, which I think now we see why that's so important. It comes through so many places in this text, how important it is to recognize awareness. I was not too concerned with behavior, but rather with the discipline of maintaining the recognition of awareness amid new chaotic environments. My discipline had been safeguarded by robes, but now he would lose his public prop. And then the closer the time that he came to actually removing the robes and going out again in the sadhu clothes, the dhoti, I meant to look up exactly what that was and see if there are images on Google. But if you want to do a Google image search, I'm sure you could find something. In any case, it's certainly different than what he was used to. And he says that as he came closer and closer to removing the robes, he says the more they felt like an infant's blanket, that without them he would be naked, vulnerable. And he had to remind himself, this is what I signed up for. This is why I'm here, to let go of the self that's attached to robes, to let go of props, to be naked, to know naked awareness. So with that, he packed up his robes. He awoke and notes that this was going to be his last night in the guest house, that he'd be out in the world. And he says again, when he first steps out, he felt a wave of embarrassment, a sense of almost too much too soon, that he had no robes, no money, no lodgings. And he says that he felt the wave was not as strong as the wave that he experienced, this wave of thought and emotion, was not as strong as as what he'd experienced on the trade ride from Gaia that we read about several chapters back. But it did break his awareness. But he did notice this with no particular judgment. So again, he's the break, but then he's aware that there's a break, and he's back in awareness. And he says, if I can stay with awareness, great. If not, that's okay too. Here's the important part. Don't create stories around good and bad, about how things should be. Shadows cannot be separated from the light. Because that's often what we do, and this is exactly in a very detailed way what the man he had spoken to, in the previous week had been doing. That when he had an idea of what he should experience in meditation, when he wasn't able to experience that, there was a whole story about failure and frustration, and instead what Mingyur Rinpoche was able to point to do is going back to just again and again, in a very simple way, recognizing awareness, and letting go of the stories and letting go of the judgments, letting go of all the ideas of good and bad that were really tying him in knots. So with that, he walked to the cremation stupa. He walked to which is a different place. It's near Kushinagar. Kushinagar is where the Buddha actually died, and the cremation stupas in that area, but not the same place. Walked to a stream where it said that the Buddha took his last bath, meditated, and as he was walking back into town, he said he saw his reflection in these saffron-colored clothes in the windows of the restaurant. And he says he was shocked to see himself out of Tibetan robes. And again, quoting him directly, he had not known how reliant he'd been on external forms of protection until he stepped into the world without them. And he ends the chapter by saying he had not managed the degree, he had not imagined the degree to which he had identified with his robes until he experienced their absence. But again, here, he sticks to his intention to add wood to the fire, to be out in the world and to not rely on props and so on in order to maintain himself, but to learn to trust in his recognition of awareness. I'll say one other thing. I meant to find my copy of Trungpa Rinpoche's autobiography, Born in Tibet, because there's a point in there where he talks about taking off his robes and realizing that, which was a significant, very significant thing, just significant in same and different ways as what Mingyur Rinpoche is talking about, that he felt wearing the robes created too much of a barrier to his teachings, and that to be able to teach students, that he needed to let go of some of the trappings that he felt created a barrier in his teaching. So it's a significant decision, a significant turning point, I think, for both of our teachers, I guess you could say. So that's what I came prepared to talk about tonight. We have a few minutes left. If there are any questions, thoughts, comments, complaints. Or just open awareness, that's good too.
I'm just going to say, Michael, just great connections. And I just feel like your connections to different sources just brought a lot more understanding for me. So thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. Just awesome. Awesome teachings tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I was reading the little piece from Garchen Rinpoche, and I stopped because I didn't want to get into the point about what Mingyur Rinpoche talks about the experience of blank or open awareness, because Garchen Rinpoche says something fairly similar. Again, so I'll just read the piece that I didn't read before. The goal is not to have no thoughts, but for thoughts to arise, yet be rendered powerless. You must habituate this. In other words, this takes practice. When he says habituate this, what he's saying is this is not like one and done. This takes practice, a lot of practice. One way to do it is through thought meditation, but we can just, any form of meditation will help us with this. Then later, when negative thoughts and emotions arise, you won't fall under their power. The energy of these thoughts may arise, but will not affect you in one or the other way. Sometimes in meditation, there will be a time when there are actually no thoughts. In that instant, you will know that this is the true nature of your mind, the mind that abides like space, vivid and empty, open, not grasping at anything. This alert awareness must be upheld through all activities. So don't try to stop thoughts, just relax into the nature of awareness. Whenever you meditate, our minds will be together. If you understand this, you will not be tired of meditation.
I liked what you pointed out, that just going blank is a form of spaciousness. That was helpful.
That was Mingyur Rinpoche's work, not mine.
Right. Well, that you brought our attention to it.
Well, that's true, I guess. How do people find the meditation on thoughts? And I just say again, it's, something to try. It's ultimately, it's good to speak with a meditation instructor. It's good to talk about meditation with fellow meditators. But in the end, ultimately, we're our own meditation instructors, provided that we're honest about what's happening in our experience.
Sorry, Michael, just to follow up with what you were asking us about how we experience the meditation that you, just the experience you gave us. I think that when it talks about the essence of meditation is awareness, joy, clarity, and inner peace are byproducts. That really sat with me in a different way. I think I definitely confuse sometimes, chasing joy and inner peace and clarity, thinking that if I don't have those, something is, or trying to hold on to those. And really, those are just the byproduct of awareness. So I think I definitely confuse, turning confusion into clarity. I confuse clarity and inner peace and joy, I think, sometimes with being what I should, if it's not happening or something, then something's wrong, or, when really they're just the byproducts. And so they can happen or not, but it's...
Yeah, it's good when they do, but grasping after them or trying to create them, that creates a problem. It's fine when they do. It's not that they should be avoided either, but, speaking for myself, I mean, sometimes I remember way back when I first started being told there's no such thing as good or bad meditation, and that made no sense to me at all, because it certainly sure didn't seem that way. But now I understand that, actually. That really it comes down to, yes, our experience might feel better or worse. I mean, sometimes I sit down to meditate and it's fairly easy, and sometimes I sit down to meditate and very restless, or I'll not feel physically well, and it's like my first thing is, how do I improve this? And then I realize, oh, that's what I'm, that's not, relax and just see what's there, rather than trying to change things. And, we go up and down all the time with these things. Miriam? And then we got to stop, but go ahead.
Right. I found the meditation helpful in the sense that it brought me some insight on the power of thought in how we feel physically. So when you started with the instructions, I found myself chasing problematic thoughts that I had had during the day, thoughts towards which I had a strong aversion, and these were um, hostile thoughts and or critical thoughts. And I think generally it was just irritability, but I was very tired today, and so when I thought about those thoughts, it's not like I identified with them, but I became aware of what they came with, the physical sense of, well, first of all, you shouldn't be having those thoughts, what an awful person you are, and what's wrong with you, and a certain heaviness that came with that. And so I, I think that it highlighted a connection between mind and body that exists, even if we don't necessarily identify with the thoughts once they're happening, and especially if we have an aversion towards them. It's an internal battle. Anyway, that was my thought on the meditation.
Great. We should stop because it's time, and we could dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. But before I do, what your experience was there, that's why sometimes Trungpa Rinpoche sometimes talked about meditation as making friends with ourselves. It's exactly what you saw there, and exactly that. All right, let us... So we'll close by dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study and contemplation for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Michael.
John.
Thank you, John and Michael.
Michael.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you
night.
so much, John and Mike. Wonderful.
John, let me know if you need that recording.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you. Thanks.